Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I hear an echo, but I'm hoping everyone can hear me. My name is Emily Friedman. I'm the head of the Business Investment for Education Impact Initiative at the Global Business Coalition for Education. And I'd like to welcome you all to our key conversation series event, Facing the Climate Crisis, Education as the Key to Climate Action. So today we're going to look at universal education as the key to climate action and explore the role of young people, governments, the business community, philanthropists, et cetera, in working together to drive change. In September, Theirworld and GBC-Education launched The Key, which is a resource for helping people make the case for education. So while quality education, as we all know, is essential for young people, as a result of the pandemic, it's been on the chopping block in government budgets and in corporate boardrooms. So The Key is really our resource to help demonstrate how education is essential to unlocking all aspects of social and economic development, everything from economic growth and health outcomes to equity, inclusion, climate action, peace and security, you name it, education is a thread connecting all of the dots. You can visit our resource at key.theirworld.org if you'd like to learn more about making the case. And throughout the year, we've been having and we will continue to have a set of conversations about how education unlocks wider opportunity. And this week, to coincide with Earth Day, I'm so excited to introduce our guests, Julia Jackson, who's the founder and CEO of Grounded, and Theirworld Global Youth Ambassador, Dr. Rachel V. Brown, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Every Mickle Foundation, among other titles, which I will let you elaborate on, but you have a lengthy resume there. We're so happy to have you here. For those of you viewing on our website, you can ask questions in the box below the screen. And then for those viewing on the streaming platform, you can tweet at us either at Theirworld or at GBC-Education. So Julia and Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having me as well.
No, we're delighted. And just to kick us off, I'd really like to set the scene on both of these issues. So to start, Julia, I'm wondering if you can outline the headlines of the climate crisis. So where are we headed if we don't take action?
That's a question I ask myself every day. The last IPCC report, which was famous for giving us our 12-year timeline and countdown, they're scheduled to come out with their next publication of the IPCC report. So we're all anxiously awaiting AR6. But basically, if we don't take action within the IPCC report, a lot of climatologists were behind that. On the upper end of the worst case scenario projections based on science, we're headed towards a world of 8 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. Anywhere between 4 and 8 degrees Celsius. And right now as a global community, we're trying to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that if that gives you any sort of perspective on how misaligned we are with our targets. Another thing that's very concerning is that with the Paris Agreement itself, only 2 countries are actually on target to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius, Morocco and Gambia, and Costa Rica is not that far behind them. So you look at the global community of all these countries, and only 2 are on track. I think the US is in the worst category, actually. It's on its way to 4 degrees Celsius, and this is just based upon business as usual. So this is if we don't take aggressive action. I think also within the IPCC report, if I'm remembering correctly, within the next decade, per year, we have to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 7.6% per year, which is doable. It's just that the window of time to reduce our emissions is closing and closing. So within the next decade, we have to take major action. We need all countries to ambitiously reduce their emissions. Another thing that's concerning is that 417 parts per million of carbon into the atmosphere. And just for those that don't know what a part per million is, I didn't until like 4 years ago. 1 part per million is equal to 8 gigatons of CO2. And globally, we are emitting about 3 to 4 gigatons, 3 to 4 parts per million per year, which is 8 times 3 or 4, like 32 billion tons and counting of carbon going into the atmosphere. Another thing too, and then I'll go to the positives. The IPCC report the last one didn't account for thawing permafrost. And within thawing permafrost, there's 1.8 trillion tons of CO2 that is underneath rapidly thawing permafrost. And permafrost is frozen ground for 2 years or more that is becoming unfrozen. And not only is there twice the amount of carbon underneath thawing permafrost as currently in the atmosphere, there's also decomposing animal carcasses that will release foreign microbes because those animal carcasses were frozen for thousands of years. And there was actually an anthrax outbreak in Siberia because a reindeer carcass that was previously frozen released an outbreak. So not just from a climate perspective, but also from a global pandemic perspective, it is concerning. And at Grounded, I founded Grounded out of my own climate anxiety and depression because I live in Northern California, and every year we're seeing major fires. And I actually had my house was burnt down by the Kincaid fire. And yet I still remain optimistic somehow in some way that we will turn around the climate crisis. But we are really living the impacts out here. And I felt really hopeless, and I was reading all the science and these books on climate, and it almost became an unhealthy obsession of mine. And I just felt really hopeless because here we are with 2 countries on track. We're heading off a cliff. People are using the word sustainable, which I have an allergic reaction to because I feel like we're sustaining bad behaviors and business as usual. So I love words like regeneration and healing and healthy biosphere, things that are like more of abundance. But anyways, I just got really depressed, and my antidote, well, it was meditation, but also action and finding solutions and solutionists, and not just supporting them financially, but also creating a summit for them to come together and share their solutions. Because I'd been to climate summits and I've been to COP, and it just felt like world leaders patting themselves on the back and CEOs saying we're doing a great job with our reductions. Yet, where were the actual solutionists? Where were the permafrost solutionists? Where were the regenerative ag solutionists? Where were all the solutionists out there? And I read a book, Drawdown, which a lot of people in the environmental space know that book, and other solutionist-oriented books. And I actually just cold called and emailed those people out of desperation and asked them to come to a summit that they'd never even heard of, and got them all in a room to present their solutions. And then in the audience, I got policymakers, funders, students, anyone that wanted to hear about the solutions, because I was sick and tired of being inundated with the news cycle being doom and gloom, which I know I kind of sounded that way earlier, but I am hopeful. I do think we have all the solutions to turn this around, and we're all at Grounded. We're all about education. We're launching a climate solutions virtual summit and a climate academy with ongoing solutions every month, a different theme, and we'll be launching with permafrost as our first topic. So yeah, sorry, I've been talking on and on.
No, I mean, I think it's so important for, some folks on the call have great knowledge of this space and others are tuning in maybe with more of an expertise or interest in education. And I think you make such a good point that there is so much that needs to be done, but that we can actually start addressing these issues. And Rachel, to you, I think, just giving us the landscape in the same way on education would be really helpful. And I would pose it to you in the same fashion that if we fail to take action on the education crisis, where will we be in 2030?
Ooh, I mean, we started off on such a light note.
Yes.
Just going to make it a little bit heavy now. Honestly, it's not looking too good at the moment in terms of where we'll be if we don't take action. It's imperative that we take action now. We can't wait. It has to happen immediately. As Julia was mentioning, there's a lot of impacts on the environment, but also on societies and on people, on our youth, who are the future, who will be the people responsible for 2030, really. And so it's really important to invest in them right now, to educate people, not just the young people, everyone, as many people as possible now, and adopt really a culture of caring for our environment, a culture of caring for humankind. In terms of environmental literacy, we really need to take into consideration that needs to be a permanent fixture of school and education right now. It shouldn't be optional. It's optional at the moment based on people's interests, but it can't be optional because it affects us all. Just like how we have physical education in schools because that affects our health and well-being, we need environmental literacy courses and education because it affects our health and our well-being. And I think one key thing is in terms of education in general, but particularly relating to the climate crisis right now, is if we do not know what the problem is, it will be impossible to solve it. We won't even be aware that there is a problem. We won't be aware of a solution or how to go about solving it, what to do, where to do it, how to do it. And that's the problem that we're having at the moment. We're very ignorant, and I think we all need to be accountable and understand that, it's a collective thing. We all can learn. It's not just the young people, it's not just the old people, it's all of us. And so, if we're not educated by 2030, in layman's terms, it's not going to be good. Yeah.
It's not going to be good. Yeah, I think, people sometimes look at these two crises as parallel issues and don't necessarily see the link. And I think, Rachel, you just did a great job of kind of bringing us in to see, obviously, if people aren't educated about the issues, then they're not going to know what to even do. And there are some stats, we have a couple here, that even strengthen that link, that show that, by educating girls, for instance, that could result in a massive reduction in emissions of 51.48 gigatons by 2050. And that's just by prioritizing the education of girls. Similarly, I guess on the flip side, if progress is halted for education overall, natural disaster-related deaths could increase by 20% per decade. So these are both some pretty amazing stats. And I'm just curious if you could both talk about, maybe Julia, we'll start with you, the work that you're doing currently, and if and how it addresses that link between education and climate change.
I think that link is critical. For me to enter the space, I did feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because there's so many brilliant people within the environmental space. So we have all the right scientists and solutionists out there. They just need more support They need more funding. They need more amplification. They need their solutions to be known. And that's really what gave me hope. And I myself, I love to read. And that was my gateway into the climate crisis and really the solutions. I used to read just about the problem. Like I read this book by David Wallace Wells called Uninhabitable Earth. And it paints a very dire dystopian future, if based on actually the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And he's just going with the science. And what your first question, what would the world look like if we continued business as usual? So if anyone wants to really know the answer to the first question, read Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. However, I will inform you, you might be in a funk for a little bit because he doesn't really offer up solutions at the end. He's got a few, but I really do believe that if we're going to present a problem, we have to present solutions. And so in terms of education at Grounded, we're pretty in line with the scientists we've spoken to and climatologists and the solutionists, that how we're structuring our videos on solutions. So we'll do like one solution, a virtual summit conversation, and a video on that solution. So permafrost, for instance, will have a permafrost scientist paired with a permafrost solutionist to talk about the threat of permafrost if we don't address it, and here's the solution to permafrost. Of course, the biggest solution to permafrost is divesting from the fossil fuel industry and reducing our global greenhouse gas emissions, which is a gigantic effort, but it's critical. We can't scale up these solutions and keep spewing out like the toxic hose. We have to turn off the hose and draw down emissions. And so this link between education and climate, we're really championing educating and empowering the public, because right now climate's really a top-down conversation and it's very siloed, and everyone has done amazing work, but they're all competing for a very small percentage of philanthropic giving. All these environmental NGOs, I think less than 2% of all philanthropy goes to environmental causes. Of that, a quarter of it makes it to communities on the ground. And so we really want to empower the public to get behind solutions and educate them. And our videos will be structured in a way that it's 25% us talking about the problem, and then the rest of the video, 75%, will be the solution, because based on our feedback from a lot of people we've spoken to, you don't want to beat people over the head with the problem too much, because it's disheartening. And I think emotionally people really will start to close down and feel afraid or feel helpless. And by presenting solutions to the problem and educating people on the solutions, I think people will be more inspired to take action. If you say the house is on fire and you don't present, okay, but here are the solutions to put out the fire, it's very overwhelming. And I empathize with people right now who are just new to this space, or maybe just read an article and are stressed out, or have what psychologists are now calling eco-anxiety. I empathize because I've been there. And quite honestly, if I didn't know about the solutions to the climate crisis, I would probably be in some sort of environmental funk. But I am optimistic that we can turn this around. There are great books out there to educate yourself with. Drawdown I would start there. It's 100 solutions to reverse climate. And actually the stat you just showed on educating women and girls, that's one of the top solutions in Drawdown, and they speak about it at length. But there's other solution books out there as well.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And Rachel, I know with your focus on education, I imagine that, you're integrating this into how you think about talking to young people, but also to adults, I'm sure, and would love to learn a little bit more.
For sure. So at the Every Mickle Foundation, we're completely youth-based and youth-led. And so we're not only serving youth, it's youth serving youth. And educating those who are volunteering while educating those who are serving. And that's helping because they're main stakeholders in the future. And in terms of environmental aspects, we're doing a lot of in terms of farming and agriculture, recycling, reusing, all of these things that I think are kind of different in a lot of cultures. I don't know about anybody else, but in my house, we don't throw away plastic bags, for example. We reuse them. They're there in the cupboard forever. We're shifting from that to using more environmentally friendly items in the households and in the orphanages that we work with as well. We've been doing a lot of farming projects and agricultural projects. So just last week, we took a visit to a Jamaican coffee farm. Jamaican coffee is the best coffee, just slightly biased, where we taught them how to grow their own coffee and how to harvest it, and also how it is good for the environment when you're growing what you're eating, and how trees affect the environment, carbon emissions and gases. We're teaching them all these things in a hands-on way, a very practical hands-on way. So also another thing is we're trying to install some solar panels in our orphanages, which will be amazing for the environment and also cut down on the cost of electricity for them. We've installed farms and gardens at each of the homes that we serve as well. And then through other projects, we're just, generally educating on the environment and the climate change and crisis that we're facing right now. And then through Good Global United Diaspora, I'm the vice president of that. We are currently working a lot of projects that deal with sustainability. Sorry, Julia. Good sustainability. I'm like looking to see if she breaks out in hives. Sorry. But the good type, water harvesting projects as well, homelessness as well. We're just doing a lot in terms of education and the environment. And so, yeah, great.
I mean, you're both doing incredible work. And I think, you're pointing, especially Rachel, in some of the examples you just gave, really kind of to personal responsibility and educating, individuals about what they can do. And I think there's obviously so much there that on a personal level, individual level needs to be done. I also think we need to zoom out and look at some of the bigger actors who are contributing to these problems and think about how they can be part of the solution. I know, Julia, you mentioned divesting in fossil fuels and sort of some other tactics. So I would pose this question to both of you, and whoever wants to answer first, please go ahead. But just curious, from where you sit, what role can the private sector play in combating climate change, and are they doing enough?
Julia, you want to go first? Because I could go all day on this.
Sure, I can chime in. It's interesting. Your question had me thinking a lot just about the private sector, because a recent report came out. Actually, maybe it was a few years ago. The Carbon Disclosure Project. You can Google it. Carbon Disclosure Project. That 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the private sector is contributing the most to the climate crisis. Yet us as individuals feel the most responsible. Of course, our consumer behaviors feed into supporting those companies. However, they are the ones that are truly having the lion's share of contributions to the climate crisis. So if you want to Google Carbon Disclosure Project, 100 companies, you can check out who those companies are. And it is concerning. I think the private sector could be doing much more. However, I think it comes down to individuals supporting those companies and being more empowered and aware of where your money goes. For instance, the fashion industry contributes to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, fast fashion in particular. So what you wear is really important to addressing the climate crisis. And you might not make that correlation because as an individual, you hear about recycling, you hear about plastic pollution, you hear about solar, you hear about like the stereotypical solutions to address the climate crisis. But I want to encourage the audience to consider a few other solutions. I would say, like, using your voice is a big solution. Educating yourself, knowledge is power. So educating yourself on the environment and climate. I'm a huge fan of that. Who you vote for, making sure that they actually care about the environment and the climate crisis. Whomever your leaders are globally, I'd say getting active in your community. I think I already said who you bank with. Your 401k who you bank with. Banks are actually, I think since the Paris Agreement came out, I was just reading this, the top banks have contributed $700 billion to the fossil fuel industry. And so whomever you bank with, you're contributing to them continuing to support extractive industries. So just researching banks that actually either have a very strong divestment plan or aren't supporting drilling in the Arctic or the extraction and deforestation of the Amazon, I think that's really important. And we have the power as individuals. We often forget that we have the power who we support. And using your voice, especially youth. I love like Fridays for the Future, the global youth movement with climate, because Gen Zers and younger generations really do see the climate crisis as life or death. And it is life or death. And we need to take it with that level of seriousness. And that's why I'm a fan of Greta and Fridays for Future, because they're really taking to the streets and saying, what's the point of going to school on Fridays if we won't have a planet to go to school on? Like, why aren't you teaching this to us in schools? And I see there's a question from someone, do you know any arranged resources by grade for teachers fifth grade and up, so youth climate action curriculum is consistent? And there really isn't a pushed effort. Maybe Rachel, you could speak to this a little more, but that I'm aware of on climate education in grade schools at this moment. And I really would love and hope to see a concerted effort with each country to implement climate education in their schools, so that youth wouldn't have to take to the streets and rebel about not learning this in school. We do need to learn about the status of our planet, but we also need to learn about the solutions. So it would be great if they could design a curriculum as well that would talk about the solutions. Anyways, I hope that addresses your question. But basically, I don't really have a lot of faith in the private sector. I have a faith in like very few companies. And I'm a fan of Circular Economy and Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, which is a more comprehensive understanding of a global economy that's not harmful to the planet and people. So yeah, that's my response.
Great.
I think you point to a lot of, sorry, Rachel, go ahead. Same question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Emily, you could go ahead and give your feedback first if you want to.
No, please.
Okay. So, this is something I'm really very passionate about, the role of the private sector in this crisis. Julia, a lot of your statistics, I know them. I also think of them in a kind of different way, right? So a lot of the people in the private sector tend to say, well, it's 100 companies out of how many hundreds of thousands of us. It's not me. I'm not the problem. Mm-hmm. It's all of our problem. We all need to be accountable. And by purchasing from a lot of these companies, we are contributing to these issues, right? And so a lot of them in the private sector will also say it's not profitable to be sustainable. Sorry, Julia, in a good way. It's not profitable, but that's not true, right? And should never be an option between profitability and sustainability. It shouldn't be a case where it's even a possibility to choose money over the environment. It's the environment. There is no equating either of the two. This is survival. This is life and death. If you're dead, you're not going to have any money. So it's, you know what I mean? There's why it's even a conversation. And so to me, there needs to be additional responsibility placed on the private sector to ensure that the option is not between profitability and sustainability. The only options that we should have are good options. And it has been shown in the research that it can actually be very profitable. There's about $12 trillion in sustainable companies that would, provide about 380 million jobs in developing companies if these companies were to switch to environmentally friendly production of these things. And if they were to do that, we as the consumers wouldn't have to think about, well, which companies are doing the right thing, which companies are helping, and we would just have options. I think we need to shift our focus from surviving to thriving, like Maya Angelou would say. It's not just a matter of, oh, we need to make it to 2030 and we need to be at this minimum. Why not aim at the maximum? Have all eco-friendly companies, have all sustainable companies. I know Julia spoke about the banks just now. In New Zealand, they just passed a law that requires banks to disclose their climate risk.
Wow.
That's accountability. That's the law now. They have no choice. And imagine what impact that's going to have. It's the first country to ever do that. Everybody can do that. Everybody can help the environment. It's all of our responsibility. And I think if we only have good choices, then we're only going to make good choices. Yeah.
No, that's such a good point, making that link also between government and, you know, us as individuals petitioning our own individual governments to take action and hold these businesses responsible. And so maybe, you know, that kind of pressure is what's needed, to start turning the tides a little bit more. I think a question from the audience sort of touched on this, and I'll pose it back to Rachel, just around youth and curriculum and how youth can be sort of better engaged when it comes to this, and does that also tie into to schools and how schools are presenting this information to the young people?
It definitely does. And that question, UNESCO released a resource list for climate education. Very helpful. And it breaks it down by age, grade, everything. It's super accessible. You could probably just Google it and download it, but I would recommend that. It's really important to have this education in schools. Many people tend to underestimate youth and underestimate what we're capable of. I'm saying we, I'm a little old now, but you know, I'm still kind of youth. The fact of the matter is we have the biggest stake in the future. We are the ones who are going to be completely directly affected by it. And as a result of that, and as a result of the fact that I want to see a good future, I want to ensure that future generations will not only thrive, but exist, period. It's important for us to instill those changes in us right now, for us to learn right now, to have that curriculum in schools right now, right across the board. And it's not just a matter of coming in with all of this fancy terminology and technology. It's very simple things.
Yeah.
Our foundation is called the Every Mickle Foundation. It comes from a Jamaican proverb, every mickle make a muckle. And that means every little thing, when combined, adds up to something big. We don't need to think of it as these huge, drastic changes. It's the little things that will make a difference. And our youth can make those little changes very, very easily. So, yeah.
It has me thinking a little bit just about how we present this information, both to youth and kind of to the global community at large. And this is an interesting question that actually came in from the audience. And I'd be curious, I can start with Julia. I'd be curious actually to hear your reactions to it. But it's about how you would advise sort of the education community to talk about the education crisis so that it has the same, quote, glitz and glam as the climate crisis. And it's something that we do talk about in the education space, but I think the climate crisis hasn't always had that cachet. It's sort of within, you know, the last maybe even 10 years before it was sort of seen as maybe a little hippie-ish or a little out there, and, you know, it wasn't so mainstream. And I wonder if there are lessons in kind of how climate action or the climate crisis is presented now that other sectors can learn from.
Absolutely. You know, I have an issue too with I guess you can say the glitz and the glam of the climate conversation. And the more I've been in this space, the more I recognize that the biggest unsung heroes of the climate crisis, I think, are Indigenous communities. Because statistically, and like talk about the opposite of glitz and glam, these are our heroes. Like if they were real life, I see them as real life, like Marvel superheroes and action. Like I think we need to get behind them, champion them, protect their territories, empower them. And so some of the work we're doing at Grounded is helping support frontline Indigenous organizations, because statistically they're less than 5% of humanity's population, yet they're stewarding 80% of the most pristine biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. And these ecosystems are a last line of defense for a livable planet and for preventing future diseases. And so by empowering Indigenous communities, and really not just empowering them as, oh, poor Indigenous communities, they're the victims, we need them in positions of leadership. We need to be learning from Indigenous knowledge, wisdom, and ideas of reciprocity and respect for Mother Nature. And I really think that the climate community needs to get way more behind Indigenous communities and champion them, and also have them take on way more positions of leadership. So it's not just a bunch of white people talking about the importance of Indigenous communities at COP, but actually Indigenous communities are in the conversation, and also BIPOC communities. I'm a fan of the book Farming While Black by Leah Penniman, which is about regenerative ag and getting Afro-Indigenous permaculture philosophy scaled. And I want to leave everyone with a hopeful statistic, because I shared a lot of like especially with the first question, like where's the planet heading? I want people to also feel some optimism walking away from this conversation. But say we just took regenerative agriculture. There's a danger in me saying, let's just get behind regenerative ag. I'm not saying that, because we need all climate solutions possible, but just take this as one example and solution. If the whole global community got behind regenerative ag and bringing back the health of soils so that they're not carbon emitting soils, but actually sequestering carbon, we could sequester and draw down 1 trillion tons potentially. That's what carbon science is saying, of CO2 from the atmosphere, which would put us back to 1870 levels of parts per million pre-industrial revolution. So that's if we turned farmland into regenerative ag farmland. And so that as a solution in and of itself, of course, we need to divest from the fossil fuel industry, and we need to scale up renewable energy, and there's so many other solutions like refrigerant management. Could go on and on and on. But if you just get behind regenerative ag as a solution, it could have major impact with the climate crisis. And so that just shows you, like, even just getting behind one solution can have major impact. What if we got behind a bunch of solutions? We could preserve a livable, healthy, abundant, thriving planet and biosphere. And that's the world that I think we should start talking about. What the world could look like if we got to work. And there's a great documentary called 2040. And it's a lot of climate documentaries are pretty intense and a little depressing. But 2040 is basically what would the world look like by 2040 if we scaled solutions? And it's a more optimistic take on the climate conversation. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I do think that if we don't educate people on the environment, then they don't even know what they're trying to solve, back to Rachel's earlier point. So you can't, the two are deeply intertwined. You can't not be educated on our home, our planet. Like, we're part of the planet. We have to be educated on the planet, where we are dependent upon it for our very survival.
Yeah, I think that's both of you are doing an excellent job sort of making the connection between all of these issues and showing how we can't think of them sort of as siloed issues, but need to be thinking kind of holistically about how we can address both the education crisis and the climate crisis simultaneously. And I'm cognizant of time. We have about 5 minutes or so left. So I'll ask you both, and Rachel, I'll start with you. Just thinking about partnership models, this was a question from the audience. So what is needed between education actors and climate actors, civil society, private sector, et cetera, for maximum climate action? And maybe that's just thinking about what kind of an ideal engagement might look like, or partnership opportunity, or if there's a best practice example you can think of, just to show the crossover.
I think the first step is to stop seeing them as separate issues. They should not be separated. It's not education and climate, and everything is together. You know what I'm saying? And so the first thing is to not see them as separate. Second step is to create a space where all the people involved, or the people involved, can come together and discuss what's happening, come up with unified goals in order to achieve everything because it's not a win or lose situation. We're all going to win if we all work together. It's as simple as that. We're actually better off together. So I think it's that. It's also incorporating these different elements into every aspect of whatever it is you're doing, your activism. It should include all of these aspects. There should be an educational aspect, an environmental aspect, and they should all be intertwined. And so to me, partnership, first is changing the models for the individuals, or the individual companies, organizations, or movements. The second thing is to partner with other movements who have hopefully the same ambitions in terms of everything, and figuring out a solution together. We need more spaces where we can have dialogue. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And Julia, your thoughts?
Absolutely agree with Rachel. We need more spaces around dialogue for, I'd say, not just the problem, but also the solutions to the problem for everyone to engage. Civil society, policymakers. I'm a fan now of being kind of like more punk rock with the climate crisis. Like, who are the organizations out there that are like, we need major action? And I like Extinction Rebellion. They're great. Fridays for the Future. And there's another one that I think is pretty awesome, and I'd love for the audience to get behind it, Ecocide Law. So really quickly, Ecocide is a type of environmental legislation because we need more lawyers for the planet, especially in the corporate sector. And right now there are no guardrails preventing companies from destroying the planet. And we can't expect to destroy the planet and then technology to save us. Like, we need a healthy biosphere. We need a living system. We need all of these ecosystems. We need insects. We need pollinators for our food. And we can't destroy them and expect not to have consequences. So I like Ecocide as a solution because it's basically a framework to get the International Criminal Court to adopt ecocide as the 5th crime against humanity. So people, CEOs, anyone destroying the Amazon or other vital carbon sinks could be held accountable in the International Criminal Court for their reckless destruction of the natural world, which we will all suffer from. So check out Ecocide Law. Of course, there's other great ones too, Earth Justice, Rights of Nature. I do think law is a powerful tool when used for the right purposes. And I think earth lawyers are awesome, and environmental legislation is needed. We need law for the planet. So yeah, check out Ecocide Law and educate yourself on that, because I think it's a way for everyone to get engaged with what's happening.
That's great. Thank you both so much, Julia and Rachel. This has been really informative. I feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface, and there's so much more we could delve into. But really appreciate your time today, and thanks to everyone on the call who's participating in our Key Conversation series. And just wanted to note a few things in closing. As many of you know on the call, that the G7 will take place later this year in the UK. So our organization and others will really be continuing to beat the drum to ensure, one, that education is a central pillar of the global pandemic economic recovery efforts. And then following that, we'll be shifting attention to the lead up of COP26, which is a UN conference, to make sure that we're still focusing on climate change and climate action as, you know, a central pillar of our work. So for updates on what we do, you can visit theirworld.org and sign up for our newsletter. And if you're interested in how the business community can do more to support education, you can sign up for updates at gbc-education.org. And we look forward to seeing you at our next conversation. So thank you all so much. And Julia and Rachel, thanks again. It was really great being with you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.